Let me tell you something uncomfortable before we start. You've seen the photographs, the Victorian dining table, white linen, silver cutlery, a full rack of toast, eggs in their cups, a covered dish of something hot and smelling of butter and smoke. It looks so done, so settled, so like a world that had its act together. Now let me tell you about the girl who made it. She's 14 years old. She woke up at 5 in the morning. She hasn't eaten since last night's bread and dripping. Her hands are cracked at the knuckles from cold water and lice soap, red as winter apples, with a burn across the heel of her left palm from a hot pan 3 weeks ago that she wrapped in a strip torn from an old apron and hasn't thought about since. 'Cause there's no time to think about things like that. She carried 9 buckets of coal up from the basement before you opened your eyes. She will not eat a single bite of what she made. And here is the thing that makes this particular kind of unfair so interesting. She's not miserable about it. Not this morning anyway. This morning she's thinking about rolls, because she's just learned to make them, and she wants to make sure she got it right. Welcome back to Henry's History for Sleep. I'm Henry, and tonight we're going somewhere that might surprise you. Not a battlefield, not a plague year, not a city collapsing under the weight of its own ambition. We're going to breakfast. Specifically, we're going to a kitchen basement in Bloomsbury, London, on a Tuesday morning in November of 1883. Victorian England at its most deceptively ordinary. A world of cast iron ranges and coal fires and kitchens running on the labour of people whose names don't appear in any history book, whose faces don't appear in any portrait, whose contributions to the smooth operation of everything were, by design, completely invisible. This is the part of Victorian history nobody photographs, the part that got up before the photographs were taken, so I make these history episodes, and I honestly don't know if people actually sleep to them, or if you're all just people who like hearing about coal ash and kitchen hierarchies at 11 at night. Either way, subscribe if you want. Get comfortable. Here we go. Your eyes open to darkness. Not the comfortable darkness of a room with curtains drawn against the morning. Not the warm darkness of somewhere familiar. Real darkness. Stone and plaster darkness. The darkness of a basement room in a house on Montague Street, Bloomsbury, London, at 5 in the morning on a Tuesday in November 1883. For half a second you don't know where you are. Then your body tells you. The cold hits first, not just air cold, surface cold. The thin cotton sheet against your cheek, the straw mattress under your hip that stopped being comfortable approximately 3 months after you arrived, the stone wall 12 inches from your nose that seeps cold the way a sponge seeps water, constant and patient, pulling the warmth from you all night without ever quite succeeding and never quite failing. Then the smell. Oh, the smell. It's not one smell. It never is down here. Coal dust first, obviously. Coal dust lives in the walls of every house in London, every house in England. It settles into everything, and you've been breathing enough of it since April to have painted a small room black from the inside. Under that, damp wool. Your own dress folded over the chair in the corner, slightly stiff from last night's steam and yesterday's work. Wool holds smell the way nothing else does. You've learned this. Fat. The faint residue of yesterday's rendering, worked into the very fibres of your hair and your clothes and possibly your skin at a cellular level. You smell of food you're not allowed to eat, which is, if you think about it too hard, a very particular kind of cruelty. And then, faint but unmistakable, the sour note of the scullery drain. The plug never quite seals. Water sits in the trap and goes strange. Overnight, every morning before you can smell anything else properly, you smell that. Welcome to 14 Montague Street, Bloomsbury, London, November 1883. You're Agnes Hartley. You're 14 years old. You came from Bolton in Lancashire, which in 1883 means you grew up breathing cotton dust and knowing which days the mill whistle blew early, and which ones your father came home with his wage and which ones he didn't quite. You've been at 14 Montague Street since April. 7 months. Long enough for London to stop being terrifying and start being ordinary, which is a transformation you didn't notice happening until it had mostly happened. The clock in the kitchen passage has just finished striking 5. You learned to hear it in your sleep within the first 2 weeks, the way you learned to hear your father's cough through the wall at home, the way you learn the sounds of any place that owns your schedule. 5 strikes, the 5th one fading. You have 30 minutes before Mrs. Payne comes down the stairs. You need to be doing something by then. Specifically, you need to have the range lit. The kitchen at 14 Montague Street is in the basement, as it is in every house on this street, in every London townhouse in Bloomsbury, in every respectable middle-class household in this city. This is not accidental architecture. The Victorians put their kitchens underground because they didn't want to see them, or smell them, or think very carefully about what happened in them. The whole physical layout of a respectable London household is engineered to create the illusion that meals emerge fully formed from some benevolent domestic nowhere, that hot food appears on dining room tables through a process requiring no sweat, no grease, no pain, no 14-year-old girl on her knees in front of a cold iron range at 5 in the morning. The basement is where the illusion is made. You swing your legs off the mattress and your bare feet hit the flagstone floor. The cold goes through the balls of your feet, up your shins, into your knees in one unbroken line of sensation. You sit there for exactly 3 seconds, because 3 seconds is all you allow yourself now. 3 seconds of acknowledgement, and then you stand. Your dress is stiff with cold when you pull it on over your shift. The buttons at the back are awkward in the dark and you do them by touch. 3 years of practice on the buttons of your own clothes and your brother's clothes, and sometimes your mother's. Your fingers knowing the shape and position of each button without needing to see. Apron. White, strictly speaking, though white is a distant memory. More accurately, a pale greyish beige that was white when it was new and is now the colour of everything in the kitchen after a hard wash and too many encounters with things that are not white. You tie it tight, hair back, pinned without a mirror. You stopped using the mirror for this in June. The mirror takes time, and time at 5 in the morning is not something you have in surplus. Then you open the door to the kitchen passage. The kitchen range is cast iron. It weighs approximately 250 pounds. I need you to understand what that means in 1883. This isn't a stove with a dial. This isn't an oven that heats to a set temperature and holds it while you go do something else. This is a machine, and I mean machine in the full sense, a complex system of moving parts with a specific operating logic that runs on coal and demands to be managed, fed, cleaned, coaxed, and occasionally cursed at like a large animal with opinions. It has moods. It has a personality. Agnes has been dealing with it for 7 months, and she still does not fully trust it in a north wind. This particular range is a Leamington patent, made sometime in the 1870s. It has a firebox on the left for boiling, an oven on the right, a water heating tank at the back, and a collection of dampers and flues whose correct configuration is a kind of professional knowledge that takes years to master. Each position of each damper affects how the heat moves through the system. Get them wrong, and you have an oven that runs cold on the right. Get them very wrong, and you have a kitchen full of smoke. The range must be lit by 6 o'clock. Breakfast must be on the dining room table upstairs by 8:15. 2 hours and 15 minutes for everything that needs to happen between cold iron and hot food. You get down on your knees in front of the range. First, the ash. Last night's ash sits in the grate, cold and grey, damp at the edges from the condensation that forms inside a banked fire overnight. You pull the ash drawer out from the bottom, heavy cast iron, handle worn smooth from daily use, and carry it to the ash bin in the scullery. The ash is light, lighter than coal, lighter than almost anything else in the kitchen. It rises around your hands when you tip it, coats your skin grey, gets into the creases of your knuckles. You breathe it in. You stopped minding somewhere around May, back to the range, clean the grate. Short bristle brush, worn to almost nothing, working in circular strokes, right arm rotating from the elbow, the motion automatic now, the shoulder accustomed to the particular resistance of iron and old ash. The iron is cold under the brush, not just cold but frigid, the deep settled cold that cast iron absorbs over a night and holds like a fact. Your knuckles brush the edge of the grate and you feel it like a sharp, small burn. Now, black lead. The black lead is a tin of black paste, graphite and tallow and other things whose composition you've never fully investigated. You work it into the surface of the range with one cloth, then buff it out with another. This is not cosmetic. A well-blacked range conducts heat better and rusts slower. Mrs. Payne checks the black in every morning before she starts work. If it's uneven or skipped, she mentions it in the specific tone she uses for things that should not require mentioning. So you do it properly, every morning. Tin to cloth to shine, your hands turning the particular grey-black of the work, the kind of black that takes 3 washes to fully remove and leaves a shadow of itself even after that. Now the fire. Paper first. Old newspapers, last week's Times, which has already been used in approximately 7 different ways before it arrives here. You crumple it loosely in the firebox, not too tight. Air has to move through. Kindling. Split wood, sticks the thickness of your thumb, laid across the paper in a loose lattice, not too tight. Then coal. And this is where most people new to service get it wrong, and why most new girls have bad fires for their first 3 months. Coal doesn't light from kindling the way wood does. You can't pile coal on top of burning sticks and expect heat. You need to consider airflow. You need to think about the flue, about whether the chimney above is drawing yet, about the cold air sitting in the shaft above the firebox that will press down against the first minutes of flame. Mrs. Payne taught you this in your first week. She sat you at the kitchen table. The first time you'd sat at it for anything other than eating your meals quickly, and drew a diagram on the back of a torn recipe card. Showed you where the hot air moved depending on the damper positions. You keep that diagram in your head. Small coal first, almost gravel-sized, scattered over the kindling in a thin layer. Just a scattering. You want heat before you want weight. A few pieces of proper coal, not too many. Space to let the air between them. Then the match. The matchbox is on the shelf beside the range. The matches are the newer kind. No white phosphorus, which matters more than you entirely understood when you arrived. Factories that make the old phosphorus matches are killing their workers slowly. A disease that starts in the jaw and doesn't stop. Parliament's been arguing about banning them for years. Parliament will eventually get around to it in about 20 years. For now, the better kind. You strike one against the tin. The head catches with a sharp flare of sulphur. You hold the flame to the corner of the newspaper. The paper catches. You watch it move through the crumpled edges, finding the path of least resistance, working upward into the kindling. The kindling doesn't catch immediately. It never does. The wood is slightly damp, stored in a basement that breathes moisture. You wait, your hands near the flame, close enough to feel the edge of heat on your cracked knuckles. Come on. The kindling catches. One small orange flame, then two, the crackle beginning. Soft at first, then louder as the fire finds more to eat. The coal glows at the edges, not burning yet. Coal doesn't flame the way wood does. It glows, deep orange red, like something alive coming awake deep inside. You adjust the dampers. Bottom damper open for draft. Top damper 3/4. Closed to hold the heat. The range begins to tick. That tick is thermal expansion. Iron molecules warming and shifting, a sound that means the machine is coming alive. It will tick for 20 minutes while the fire establishes itself, then settle into a working temperature with a different sound, a steady radiant heat you can feel from 2 feet away. You stand up. Your knees hurt from the flagstones. They always do. The kitchen is still dark except for the orange glow from the firebox. You light the 2 oil lamps on the kitchen table. The room comes into view around you. It's not a large kitchen. Maybe 15 feet long by 12 feet wide, the ceiling low enough that you've learned not to stand up too quickly near the shelves. The walls are whitewashed lime, the white going grey from years of cooking smoke. The floor is flagstone, laid in the 1850s when the house was built, worn smooth along the paths between the range and the table and the scullery door. Along one wall, the range, and beside it the coal scuttle. You'll need to refill that before Mrs. Payne arrives, and the wood box and the poker and tongs. Along another wall, shelves. The copper pots hang above everything, gleaming because you polished them on Saturday. The earthenware bowls in sizes from very large to almost useless. The wooden boards for meat and bread and pastry, each in its designated position, because Mrs. Payne would no more chop bread where she'd chopped mutton than she'd eat with her fingers. The kitchen table runs down the centre. Scrubbed white pine, worn to softness from decades of use, showing the grain in the worn spots like wood shows its history. This table has probably seen more human activity than the dining room above it has in its entire existence. Nobody takes photographs of kitchen tables. And then the dresser, with the china you're not supposed to touch. The good china, white with a thin blue rim for upstairs. Mrs. Payne handles the good china herself. Your job is to wash it in water that isn't too hot and dry it with a cloth that isn't too rough. Any chip or crack must be reported immediately. Any chip or crack that isn't reported immediately is grounds for dismissal without a character. You broke 1 cup. It's at the bottom of the coal scuttle. Nobody knows. This is one of approximately 40 small guilty secrets that live in your head at all times. The life of a scullery maid is partly a life of practical labour and partly a constant low-grade management of information. The range will take 20 minutes to reach proper working temperature. In those 20 minutes, water. The water supply at 14 Montague Street is better than it used to be. The house was plumbed in the 1870s, which means there's a cold tap in the scullery. In your mother's childhood, every drop of water in every house in Bolton had to be carried from a standpipe in the street, and you've heard the stories enough times to understand what the cold tap represents. But the tap only gives cold water. Everything hot has to be heated on the range. So you fill the large kettle, 12 pints of water, heavy enough that you carry it with both hands, arms straight, the weight pulling down on your shoulders. You set it on the hot plate, the large copper pot. Fill that too. That's for the porridge. The medium pot for the eggs. The small pot for whatever else turns out to be needed. 8 trips between the scullery tap and the range. Each trip carries the weight of the water, plus the weight of the pot, plus the weight of the fact that you've been awake for 20 minutes and haven't eaten since yesterday's bread, with yesterday's dripping, hard from sitting overnight in the cold. By the end of the 8th trip, the range is beginning to put out real heat. You can feel it against your legs when you stand close to it, the warmth that means something is genuinely happening. The kitchen smells different now, not the flat, dead smell of cold stone and coal ash from 5 minutes ago. Something is coming alive. Steam beginning, metal warming. The particular smell of a kitchen waking up. Slightly sweet, slightly industrial, full of potential. You refill the coal scuttle. Out the scullery door to the small area where the coal is stored under a wooden lid. Fill the scuttle, carry it back, keep it away from your apron because coal dust on white cotton compounds throughout the day into a visible indictment of everything you touched. Your arms ache. Not dramatically. Just the low, persistent ache of early morning labour, the kind that becomes so familiar after a few months that you stop registering it as sensation and start registering it as simply the texture of the morning. At 5:30 exactly, the door at the top of the kitchen stairs opens. Mrs. Payne's footsteps come down. You know her footsteps the way you know the range, by sound and weight and rhythm. Mrs. Payne takes stairs as though she's making a point about something, each foot landing with deliberate authority, measured, unhurried, the pace of someone who has been descending kitchen stairs for 30 years and has never once been in a hurry about it. She's 53 years old. She has been a cook for 31 years, in houses ranging from a vicar's cottage in Somerset to 3 years in a household in Belgravia that she still mentions at intervals, the way a person mentions that they once shook hands with someone significant. She's built like the range, substantial, efficient, slightly terrifying if not managed properly. Her hair is grey and pinned in a way that has not changed in the 7 months you've known her, and probably not in the decade before that. She appears in the kitchen doorway, apron already tied, cap straight, and surveys the room in approximately 4 seconds. Her eyes go to the range, to the coal scuttle, to the copper pot, to you. "Kettle slow," she says. "It is not slow. You lit the range 25 minutes ago, which is as fast as you can heat. 12 pints of water on a range that started stone cold at 5 o'clock in November. But you have learned, through trial and one memorable error, not to explain this. Yes, Mrs. Payne. We've got kippers today." She says this the way you might announce a minor natural disaster. You understand the implications immediately. Kippers mean the whole kitchen smells like smoked fish for the entire morning, which means everything prepared in proximity carries a faint suggestion of kipper, which means additional attention to keeping smells separated, more pots, more washing, more management of the basic fact that smoked fish and fresh bread rolls would prefer not to share the same air. And Mrs. Alderton asked for soft rolls yesterday. Mrs. Payne says this while opening the larder. Her voice carries through the larder door with the ease of someone who knows their kitchen acoustically. "I'll need the oven to temperature by 6:30. The oven, right. You adjust the dampers. I need you to understand what goes on a respectable middle-class breakfast table in London in 1883. And when I say respectable, I mean this precisely. Mr. Charles Alderton is a solicitor. He earns approximately £800 a year. This puts him solidly in the professional middle class, not wealthy, not struggling, the kind of man who reads the newspaper at breakfast and expects it to be ironed, and expects his eggs to be exactly as he likes them, and has opinions about the quality of the marmalade. Mrs. Alderton oversees the household with the kind of precision that would have served well in other fields. She has 2 children and a cook and a parlour maid and you. She manages this with daily consultations with Mrs. Payne, a housekeeping book updated every evening, and a running inventory of the larder she checks every Monday morning. The Alderton breakfast on a regular morning consists of porridge, always porridge, kippers today because Thursday is kipper day. Usually it would be bacon and eggs, but the fishmonger's boy came yesterday. Soft rolls, 2 each for Mr. and Mrs. Alderton, 1 each for the children, 1 extra, because there always is. Butter, real Devonshire butter, purchased weekly. Dundee marmalade, the specific Dundee marmalade from the specific shop in Oxford Street and nowhere else. Boiled eggs for the children. The children will not eat kippers. This has been established. Tea, a full pot, then another. Cold ham from last night's joint left on the side. Toast made at table by Mr. Alderton himself, at the fireplace with the long-handled toasting fork, because Mr. Alderton has strong views on toast making and does not trust anyone else. That is a great deal of food. That food does not make itself. The porridge starts first because it takes the longest. You measure oatmeal from the sack in the larder, not the fine ground, the medium. Mrs. Payne keeps 4 grades of oatmeal and uses each for different purposes, and God help you if you use the fine for porridge or the medium for thickening a sauce. 3.5, Mrs. Payne says as she passes, not looking up from the eggs she's examining against the lamp, holding each one up to the light. They were hungry yesterday. 3.5 cups of oatmeal into the copper pot which now has hot water in it, beginning to shimmer above the firebox. You stir. The oatmeal thickens almost immediately, the starch releasing, the mixture moving from thin and grainy to dense and resistant. Steam rises around the wooden spoon and hits your face, warm and slightly sweet. The smell is not unpleasant. Oatmeal smells like something fundamental, like comfort, like mornings, like the same porridge your mother made every morning in Bolton on the smaller range in the kitchen that was half the size of this one, measured the same way but with salt and a scraping of lard when there was lard. You stir with the long-handled spoon, left hand steadying the pot, right arm working in slow circles against the resistance of thickening porridge, which pulls at the spoon with increasing authority as it cooks. Porridge resists being stirred. This sounds like nothing. It is not nothing. By the end of 5 minutes of continuous stirring, the muscles in your right forearm are burning in a different way from how the cold burned them. From the inside, from the work, the small persistent complaint of repetitive effort against resistance. You switch to your left arm. Mrs. Payne does not comment. Whether she notices and chooses not to comment, or whether she genuinely doesn't notice, you have learned to treat these as the same thing. The kippers are on the middle shelf of the larder, wrapped in waxed paper, 12 of them, long, flat, rust-coloured, smoked Yarmouth herring, gutted and split and dried over oak chips in Great Yarmouth, where the herring cure has been more or less the same for about 400 years. The smell when you unwrap the paper is the sea and fire and something. Sweet sharp underneath, the smoke worked deep into the flesh. It hits you in a wave that is not unpleasant but is very definite. Mrs. Payne has a method for kippers, and the method is not what you might expect. Not fried, not grilled, poached. She pours boiling water over them in a long porcelain dish and leaves them for 3 minutes precisely. No more. This keeps the smell from spreading quite as extensively through the upstairs rooms. You boil the water, you carry the dish, porcelain, heavier than it looks, to the range. You pour carefully, because boiling water over kippers in a narrow dish requires attention unless you want to scald the back of your hand, which you have done once. The mark lasted a week. The kippers go in, the water clouds with dissolved fat from the fish. The smell intensifies comprehensively. It fills the kitchen in a way that is absolute and complete. You breathe it in. After 30 seconds, you stop noticing it. After a minute, it is simply the smell of work. After 5 minutes, it has disappeared from your conscious awareness entirely. You won't know this until you go upstairs later and Edith the parlour maid wrinkles her nose and says you smell of fish, which you will say with a very specific condescension of someone who considers her position in the household hierarchy to be meaningfully superior to yours, even though the difference between a parlour maid and a scullery maid is about 2 shillings a week and a considerably better variety of smells. Mrs. Payne makes the rolls herself. This is one of the kitchen hierarchies you've come to understand. There are things she makes, requiring judgment and timing and expertise, and there are things you make, requiring labour and attention and strong arms, and a willingness to be covered in whatever substance the job involves. The line between these territories is not written anywhere. You learned it by watching what got done by whom, and by the occasional sharp look that indicated you'd trespassed. But today, you stand close. You watch her hands work the dough, the flour from the tin measured by eye. She's made this dough enough times that her hands know the weight before her mind calculates it. The yeast dissolved in warm water, the water temperature tested against her inner wrist exactly as you'd test a baby's bath. The mixing done with one hand in the bowl, working the dough against the side, folding and pressing in a motion that looks casual and is not. Under her hands the dough changes. This is something you've observed but can't yet explain in any useful way. It goes from sticky and rough to smooth and responsive, the surface becoming different, the way the dough sounds against the bowl changing, less ragged, more fluid. Something is happening inside it. She turns it out onto the floured board and works it for another 2 minutes, both hands now, the heel of each hand pushing forward, the fingers curling it back. A rhythm that is almost meditative, almost restful. You'll learn this eventually, she says, not looking up. You take this as the compliment it probably is. It is 7:30 in the morning. Upstairs, the house is beginning to wake. You know this from sounds that filter down through the floors. Mr. Alderton rises at 7:15. His footsteps are unmistakable, heavier and more measured than his wife's, crossing from the bedroom to the dressing room. By 7:30 he'll be in the morning room with the newspaper, which Edith will have ironed, actually ironed, with a flat iron heated on the range, the ink on the newsprint needing to be fixed so it doesn't transfer to his hands, and placed on his reading table before he came down. A newspaper, ironed, while you were lighting the range. By 7:45 the children will be down from the nursery. Master Frederick 8 and Miss Millicent 6, appearing with their nursemaid and their respective breakfast requirements, which are firm and non-negotiable. At 8 o'clock Mrs. Alderton descends. 8 o'clock is the signal that food should be appearing on the dining room table. 8:15 is the deadline. It is now 7:30. You have 45 minutes. The children's eggs need to be perfect. I want to dwell on this for a moment because the eggs need to be perfect sounds like ordinary kitchen fussiness. It isn't. If the children's eggs are wrong, overcooked, undercooked, cracked in the water, set unevenly, the children say so. Children are precise in their complaints. Then Mrs. Alderton mentions it to Mrs. Payne, quietly, and with the careful neutrality of someone who is technically just relaying information. And then Mrs. Payne says nothing. And then the kitchen acquires a quality of silence that sits differently from ordinary kitchen silence, that presses against you specifically, that lives in the space between instructions. You have experienced this quality of silence twice. You do not want to experience it again. The water in the medium pot is simmering, not boiling, simmering. Boiling hard cracks eggs, which go stringy in the water in white wisps and become a mystery of texture on delivery. You lower the eggs in gently, one at a time, on the spoon, and you count. 3 minutes 45 seconds for medium-sized eggs, 3:15 for small, 4:15 for large. These are medium eggs. You know this from the weight of them in your hand when you took them from the larder. You count in your head while doing 3 other things simultaneously. In your head, 62, 63, 64. On your left, Mrs. Payne is sliding the rolls from the oven. The oven door opens with its particular weighted resistance, and the heat comes out and hits the left side of your face like a brief summer, sudden and smelling of bread. The rolls are golden, slightly darker at the top than the sides. The smell of fresh bread fills the kitchen instantly, crowding out the kippers, replacing the morning's accumulated smells with something that makes your stomach say something urgent and involuntary. You're hungry. You're very hungry. In your head, 198, 199. You do not reach for the rolls. You count 2:45. You lift the eggs from the water, one at a time on the spoon, into the egg cups Edith lined up on the dresser last night. Now let me tell you about what actually, honestly, truly goes on a working-class breakfast table in the same city, on the same morning, in the same year. And when I say working class, I mean the majority of the people in this city, in this country, in this economy, in the East End of London, in Whitechapel and Bethnal Green and Stepney and Shoreditch, a breakfast in November of 1883 might be bread, if there is flour, dripping, the fat rendered from a roasting joint, if last week included a small piece of meat, not every week, tea made from used leaves, dried and re-steeped until they produce water that is warm and brown and smells vaguely of tea without tasting quite enough like it. That is breakfast. For a large family, and families in 1883 tended toward the larger end of the possible, this would be divided across however many mouths existed at the table, which might be 5, might be 7, might be 8. The children, in many households, ate last. Think about that carefully for a moment, not as a statistic, as a morning. A mother cutting bread at a kitchen table, aware of how much bread there is and how many children there are, and making the calculation. The man who earns the wages eats first and eats most, because without his strength the wages stop. The mother eats what remains. The children eat what remains of what remains. This is not unusual. This is the shape of the economy. In 1889, 6 years after our morning here, a man named Charles Booth will publish the first volumes of his extraordinary survey called Life and Labour of the People in London. He has spent years interviewing families, visiting streets, documenting the actual conditions of life in the city. His survey will demonstrate in numbers that can't be argued with that approximately 30% of the population of London is living in poverty. 30%. In the richest city in the richest country in the world. Booth measures poverty partly by food, one of his markers, insufficient food, not no food, insufficient, barely enough, the bread and margarine household, the watered tea, the meal that's technically a meal but doesn't quite do what a meal is supposed to do. But before we get to that comparison, let me take you somewhere else for a moment. Not just across London, out of London entirely. Because 1883 is not only Bloomsbury and Whitechapel, it's the whole world happening simultaneously. And breakfast in that world looks almost unrecognisably different depending on where exactly you open your eyes. In New York City, on the same November morning, in a tenement building on Orchard Street on the Lower East Side, a family of 7 recently arrived from somewhere in Eastern Europe, the exact country depending on which wave of immigration and which recruiter and which ship, is eating black bread and salt herring and weak tea from a glass. The apartment is 1 room. 4 children share 1 bed. The father is already gone. He left at 4:30 for the garment district, where the workday starts when the foreman says it starts and not a minute later, and does not end until the foreman says that either. The mother is stretching a loaf of bread across 7 people's mornings. She's not, by the standards of this moment in history, considered poor. She has bread. She has herring. She has a kerosene stove that works. In the same city, 15 blocks north, a brownstone breakfast table holds eggs and ham and fresh rolls, and a silver coffee service and a morning newspaper folded to the financial section, because the man who lives here has opinions about railroad bonds and likes to form them before 9 o'clock. Different city, same arithmetic. In Paris, because Paris in 1883 is doing what Paris always does, which is performing its own version of civilization with extraordinary commitment, a worker in Belleville, the eastern working-class arrondissement, eats his breakfast standing at the zinc bar of a small cafe. Black coffee, very strong, and a piece of yesterday's baguette. That's it. He drinks the coffee in 2 minutes, puts down the cup, and walks to the factory. Across the city in the 7th arrondissement, a bourgeois family eats breakfast at a table with a cloth and a pot of real coffee and croissants, which have been brought from the boulangerie by the maid who got up an hour and a half ago to fetch them while they were still warm. The maid ate at the kitchen table, coffee and bread. She fetched croissants. In rural Bavaria, in a farmhouse, a farming family's breakfast is rye bread, soft cheese, cold smoked sausage, and milk. Real milk, warm from this morning, from the cow in the barn 40 feet from where they're sitting. It is, nutritionally speaking, probably the best breakfast of any of these people. More protein, more fat, more actual substance. The farmer's wife baked the bread herself 2 days ago from rye grown in the field she can see from the kitchen window. This is not romantic. The farmhouse is cold. The work that follows breakfast is physical to the point of brutality. The cheese is made in the farmhouse from milk that occasionally goes wrong in ways nobody discusses. The farmer will be bent and arthritic by 55 from the kind of labour that doesn't pause for weather. But the bread is real. The milk is real. The sausage is made from animals whose names the children knew. In Bombay, which in 1883 is a British colonial city of extraordinary complexity, a place that contains roughly 1,000 years of accumulated civilization plus 30 years of increasingly aggressive British administrative overlay. A dock worker in the mill district eats a breakfast of rice and dal from a clay vessel, sitting on the steps outside his building in the early morning heat, the kind of heat that has been there since before dawn and will not relent until October, which has already passed, making this a relatively pleasant November morning by Bombay standards. The rice was cooked yesterday and reheated this morning. The dal is thin but hot. He eats with his right hand, quickly, efficiently. The way you eat when breakfast is fuel and fuel is time and time is money and money is survival. In a different part of the same city, in a bungalow in the European Quarter, a colonial administrator's wife is receiving her breakfast from a bearer, white-gloved, formally dressed, carrying a tray with kedgeree and toast and real tea and a small pot of Cooper's Oxford marmalade shipped from England at considerable expense, because the food of home is one of the mechanisms by which the colonial mind maintains its sense of self in places it does not quite belong. There is the kedgeree again, the dish Agnes made on Christmas morning from the recipe Mrs. Payne learned from a cook, who learned it from a cook who learned it somewhere in the chain of cultural appropriation that runs between India and English breakfast tables, and has been running since the East India Company started bringing things back. The dish travelled east to west, and arrived in English kitchens and became English food, and the English eat it at breakfast in London and in Bombay, sometimes within a mile of the people whose cooking tradition it came from, without any particular acknowledgement of the journey it made. This is 1883. This is how empire works at the breakfast table. In Japan, which in 1883 is in the middle of the Meiji period, the extraordinary 15-year transformation in which the country decided, with characteristic intensity of national commitment, to modernize at speed, a merchant family in Tokyo eats a breakfast of steamed rice, miso soup, grilled fish, pickled vegetables, and green tea. This breakfast has looked substantially the same for several hundred years, and will continue looking substantially the same for another 140 years, with minor variations. It is high in protein, low in fat, moderate in calories, and associated in later centuries with some of the best longevity statistics in the world. Nobody in 1883 knows this yet. The science of nutrition as a formal discipline barely exists. The germ theory of disease is new and contested. Vitamins haven't been discovered. The word calorie in its nutritional sense was coined just a few years ago and hasn't found its way into ordinary conversation yet. People eat what they eat because of what they can afford, what their culture taught them, what's available in their geography, and what they've always eaten. The science will come later, mostly validating or condemning what habit already established. The Japanese merchant family eating their rice and miso in November of 1883 are eating one of the most nutritionally sound breakfast available on Earth at this moment in history. They have no idea. They're just having breakfast. And then there are the places where breakfast is not happening at all. Not because of war or famine in the dramatic sense, not the catastrophic events that show up in history books, but because of the ordinary grinding poverty that is the background condition of most of the world in 1883 and doesn't require a catastrophe to explain. Sub-Saharan Africa, rural China, the tenant farms of Ireland still recovering from a famine 30 years past that killed 1 million people and drove another million out of the country. The plantations of the American South, where the formal institution of slavery ended 18 years ago, and the informal institution of debt, peonage, and racial terror, has replaced it with something that looks different on paper. In all of these places, in November of 1883, millions of people are eating inadequate breakfast or no breakfast at all. Not as an emergency, as a Tuesday. The emergency would be Thursday. This is the world Agnes is feeding. Not directly, not consciously. But the food she makes, the porridge and the rolls and the devilled kidneys and the kedgeree, is made possible by systems that run around the planet. The spices in the kedgeree came from somewhere. The tea in the locked caddy came from somewhere. The copper in the pots was mined somewhere. The coal in the range was dug by men in South Wales and Yorkshire who eat breakfasts of bread and dripping, who cannot afford to eat what their coal is heating. None of this is visible in the kitchen at 14 Montague Street. The supply chain that ends in Agnes's scullery is invisible by design, not by conspiracy, simply by the way that complex systems work, by the way that the point of consumption doesn't naturally see the points of extraction and labour and suffering that preceded it. But the systems are there, and if you pull on any thread of this kitchen, the kettle, the coal, the tea, the sugar in the porridge, the thread runs somewhere specific, attached to something specific, attached to someone specific whose morning looks nothing like this one. Agnes doesn't know this. She's 14 and she's making porridge, but you know it now, and breakfast will never look quite the same. Compare that to the Aldertons upstairs, the same city. Half a mile away, maybe. The same cold November morning. One family, kippers and soft rolls and Dundee marmalade and soft-boiled eggs and cold ham on the side and real Darjeeling tea. The other family, bread and something on it, and water that has been persuaded to taste like tea. This is 1883. This is normal. Nobody with the power to change it is significantly bothered by it. The government will start allowing, not requiring, allowing, school feeding programs in 1906. 23 years from now, and even then they'll argue about it extensively first. For now, bread and dripping. Here is something else I should tell you, while we're being honest about what people are eating. A great deal of it is fake, not in a modern sense, not this biscuit has added vitamins. In the actual material, someone is deliberately adding things sense. Bread. White bread in this era, especially cheap bread from cheaper bakeries, often contains alum. Alum is a mineral compound used as a whitening agent. It makes cheap, slightly grey flour look like good white flour. It also makes the bread heavier, which means less flour per loaf, which means more profit per bag of flour. Alum is, at best, indigestible, and at worst quietly corrosive to the gut lining over years of daily consumption. But it's been in cheap bread for decades, and the bakers who use it have no immediate incentive to stop. Parliament passed the first Adulteration of Food Act in 1860, and a stronger one in 1872. These helped, somewhat. But enforcement is patchy. The people most affected are the people least able to challenge it. The poor buying from cheap shops with no laboratory and no legal recourse. Milk. In London in 1883, milk is almost certainly adulterated, either watered down, which reduces nutritional value and increases the risk of waterborne disease, because the water added is often not clean, or treated with chemicals to mask the fact that it's going off. There is no refrigeration. Milk begins to sour within hours in warm weather. Things are added to manage this. Tea. The cheap tea downstairs at 14 Montague Street might be genuine tea leaves mixed with previously used tea leaves, dried and mixed back in. Might contain other dried plant matter that resembles tea. The industry for adulterated tea is sophisticated enough to be an industry. What Agnes is drinking with her bread and dripping every morning? Probably mostly fine. Probably is doing a lot of work in that sentence. The dishes arrive. Edith brings them down the service stairs on the tray at approximately 8:50, stacked with the efficient carelessness of someone who knows you will deal with them. The residue of a middle-class Victorian breakfast. Egg cups with the white and yellow remains of soft-boiled eggs, still slightly warm. Plates with kipper bones. The kippers have been eaten. Only the long fine bones remain, lying in a pattern like a leaf skeleton, with a small amount of dark skin and the brownish liquid. Porridge bowls. The children's in particular have left a thick grey rim of dried porridge, where the last of it's set against the sides. You know from experience that this requires the bristle brush and more time than it should reasonably take. The marmalade dish. The spoon adhered by setting marmalade to the side of the dish. The bread basket. 3 rolls remain. Untouched. Warm when they went up. Cold now. Just bread sitting in the basket, no longer useful to anyone upstairs. You look at the rolls for exactly 2 seconds. The rule is that leftover family food goes to Mrs. Payne to be used in the kitchen or at the servants' table. This is understood. The other rule, equally understood, is that a scullery maid eating from the family tray without explicit permission is grounds for dismissal. You look at the rolls for 2 seconds, then you start on the egg cups. The scullery is small, a stone sink, deep, with the cold tap above it, a draining board, a shelf for the block of hard soap you shave flakes from with a small knife, the bristle brush, the drying cloth. You fill the sink with hot water from the range. Steam rises around your hands as you plunge them in. Very hot. Not boiling, but close. Hot enough that the first second is an involuntary flinch, and then the body adjusts, crossing the threshold where the water just becomes the new normal and the air outside your arms feels colder than before. Egg cups first. Easy. Swirl. Wipe. Into the rack. Porridge bowls. Harder. The dried porridge resists the cloth. You use the brush and sustained pressure, and the mild frustration of knowing that if someone had rinsed these immediately after using them, the job would take 30 seconds. They didn't. They never do. Kipper plates. The fish smell, which has been resident in your sinuses since 5:30, intensifies as the plates hit hot water. A fine steam of kipper-scented vapour rises from the sink. You work through the stack. Your hands go from hot to very hot, to the strange plateau of constant warmth where you stop distinguishing between the water temperature and your own skin temperature, where everything within range of the sink is simply warm. Then, as you finish, when you pull your hands out, the air is suddenly cold. Your hands are tender from long soaking, the skin temporarily soft and slightly fragile, the ridges of your fingerprints more pronounced than usual. You dry them on the cloth. The cloth is warm from the steam. You are Agnes Hartley, scullery maid, and your hands are the instruments of your work, and they show it. Your breakfast happens at approximately 8:30, in the window between the first wave of dishes going upstairs and the first wave coming back down. You sit at the kitchen table with Mrs. Payne, who sits across from you and begins to eat without comment. Your breakfast, bread, yesterday's loaf, 2 slices sliced this morning, dripping. The rendered fat from last week's beef joint, clarified and set in a white basin, beige in colour, smelling faintly of beef, with a layer of solidified aspic at the bottom. You spread it with the kitchen knife. Tea. The tea downstairs is not the tea that goes upstairs. The tea upstairs is Darjeeling from the locked caddy with the key on top of the dresser behind the blue jug. The tea downstairs is something cheaper, a grade you couldn't specify exactly. You drink it with milk and 2 sugars and it is warm and wet, and that is essentially what it needs to be. That is, your breakfast. 2 slices of bread with dripping and a cup of cheap tea. And I want to be precise about something. This is not starvation. You have known mornings in Bolton, lean mornings when your father was on the short time of the mill, when breakfast was 1 slice, and the tea was made from the same leaves as yesterday, pale and barely warm. Compared to that, this is adequate. But you've spent the last 3 hours within 2 feet of fresh bread rolls and smoked kippers and soft-boiled eggs and cold ham and real Dundee marmalade and Darjeeling tea. You have handled all of it with your hands. The smell of all of it is in your hair, and you are eating bread with dripping. 2 slices of bread with dripping. I want to stay here for a moment with this food and be precise about what it is. Dripping. The word sounds almost cozy, nostalgic even. There are people today, people alive right now, who remember eating bread and dripping as children and describe it with a kind of warmth, as though it was a treat. Simple food, honest food, the kind of food that builds character. Let me tell you what dripping actually is. When you roast a joint of beef or mutton, fat renders out of the meat as it cooks. It falls into the pan. At the bottom of that pan, you also have meat juices, the water content of the muscle fibres, mixed with proteins and blood residue and whatever was on the surface of the meat. These mix with the fat and collect in the pan. When the pan cools, the fat solidifies on top into a pale beige or yellowish layer. Below it, the meat juices set into a brown aspic, a natural gelatin from the collagen in the connective tissue. Some of the fat absorbs residual flavour from the cooking. The meat, the herbs if any were used, the char from the pan, that is dripping. Animal fat, saved from cooking, spread on bread. The nutritional content, almost entirely fat, some protein traces from the aspic layer. No carbohydrate, no vitamins to speak of. Very high in saturated fat. Dense in calories in the specific way that things are dense in calories when the body is running on too little and needs concentrated energy. In 1883, dripping is eaten extensively because it is cheap, because it keeps reasonably well in a cool larder, because fat provides calories, and calories provide the energy to work, and because the body doesn't draw fine distinctions about the source of its fuel when it's hungry. The body needs energy. The body needs it available. The body does not read pamphlets about cardiovascular risk. The science of what fat does to arteries over 20 or 30 years of daily consumption is not science that exists in 1883. The connection between diet and heart disease is not established until the mid-20th century, 70 years from now. The people eating bread and dripping in November of 1883 are not making an uninformed choice exactly. They are making the only available choice, which is different. Agnes doesn't know she is eating something that will, over a long enough time and in large enough quantities, do specific and measurable damage to specific biological systems. She knows she is hungry, and this stops the hunger. That is the entire analysis available to her. She eats it with the honest relief of someone whose body needed fuel and has received it. The bread itself, let's be honest about the bread too. The bread is yesterday's loaf, which means the yeast is starting to turn and the crumb is beginning to firm towards staleness. That transition from soft to slightly denser and drier that happens to bread over its second day. Not bad bread, not inedible bread, but bread that is making its way toward its final form. In the Alderton household, bread that reaches this stage goes below stairs. The rolls from the morning before go into tomorrow's bread sauce or tomorrow's pudding. Nothing is wasted. Mrs. Payne runs a kitchen of zero food waste, not out of environmental consciousness, but because food costs money and waste costs money, and the household accounts are reviewed by Mrs. Alderton every Sunday evening. The hierarchy is not only about fresh versus stale, it's about who gets first access to the fresh and who gets the management of what remains. Agnes eats the managed remains. She finishes every bite. You eat it. You eat it quickly because the next wave of dishes is coming and the morning doesn't pause for you. Mrs. Payne has cut herself a piece of cold ham from the joint. The remains of what went upstairs, the ends and the slightly dried edge, and eats it with her bread without offering you any. This is not cruelty. The ham is exactly enough for Mrs. Payne. You eat your bread, you drink your tea, you think about the rolls in the basket, you think about something else. There's a conversation that isn't happening yet in 1883, but that is about to start happening and will eventually change things. It's about what children eat for breakfast. Or more precisely, it's about the fact that many children in this city are not eating breakfast, or are eating so little that the word breakfast is doing a lot of heavy lifting to describe it. The argument being assembled, slowly, by reformers and doctors and women's organisations and eventually trade unionists, is essentially this. If you want children to learn in the schools you've made them attend, you need them to have eaten. The brain does not function on empty. The body does not concentrate when it's using its remaining energy to keep itself upright. This seems obvious. It was apparently not obvious enough to the government of 1883, which maintained that feeding poor children was a matter of private charity and parental responsibility, and not in any sense the business of the state. The argument will eventually be won. In 1906, the Education Provision of Meals Act allows local authorities to provide school meals. Allows, not requires. Even then, it'll take years of argument before it becomes standard. Practice. But in this kitchen, in this November, the argument hasn't been won yet. There are charitable organisations doing what they can. The Ragged School Union providing some meals in the worst areas, churches running penny dinners, philanthropists funding breakfast clubs. It is piecemeal. It is charity, which means it depends on what donors feel like giving this month, which means it is inconsistent, which means children are inconsistently fed. And malnutrition in 1880s. London is not a soft statistic. It is cracked ribs from bones that didn't calcify properly. It is cognitive development compromised before it has a chance to begin. It is children going to school, the school they are required by law to attend since 1870, and sitting in class unable to absorb what's being taught, because their bodies are directing every available resource towards simply keeping the lights on. This is the other side of the porridge bowl. You're stirring it in a basement in Bloomsbury. Somewhere, across the city, someone isn't stirring anything because there's nothing to stir. It happens on a Thursday, 3 weeks into November. Mrs. Payne does not come down the stairs at 5:30. You wait. You've had the range going since 5, the water heating, the scuttle filled. 5:30 comes, goes, 5:45. Your stomach does something quiet and specific. At 5:50, footsteps. But wrong, lighter, faster, coming from the direction of the family stairs. The door opens, and it is Mrs. Alderton. Mrs. Alderton in her housecoat, grey wool, hair not yet arranged. Which is something you have never seen. In your mental map of this household, Mrs. Alderton exists only in her fully assembled state. Hair done, house managed, day organised. She is not a person who appears in kitchens at 5:50 in a housecoat. Agnes! Her voice is controlled. The voice of someone who's decided not to panic and is holding to that decision with some effort. Ma'am. Mrs. Payne is unwell. She won't be down this morning. Pause. You look at her. She looks at you. You're to manage breakfast. Ma'am, I know what you are. She says it precisely, not unkindly. A statement of fact. Breakfast is at 8:15. Mr. Alderton has a court appearance at 9. The children need to be at lessons by 8:30. She turns to go, then turns back. Mrs. Payne left notes on the kitchen table. She said you'd know what to do. Then she goes back upstairs. You stand very still for approximately 5 seconds. Then you go to the table. There are notes. A single sheet of paper in Mrs. Payne's surprisingly elegant hand. 30 years of writing in kitchens has produced handwriting that is clear and economic and tolerates no waste of ink. Porridge, already measured in the blue bowl, 3½ cups. You know how. Eggs for children, soft-boiled, 3:45. You've watched. Kippers, not today. Use the bacon, back shelf wrapped in cloth, rolls not possible. Yesterday's loaf sliced. Tea, the locked caddy. Key on top of the dresser behind the blue jug. Don't tell anyone. You read this twice. Then you start. The bacon is on the back shelf of the larder. The back shelf. Mrs. Payne's territory. You fetch things from there when instructed, but you've never made decisions in front of it. You stand in the larder and look at the back shelf. The bacon, a half joint wrapped in a cloth. You unwrap it. Salt and smoke, the cured smell, different from kipper smoke, but in the same family. Something preserved, something that has been through a process. How much? You calculate. Mr. and Mrs. Alderton, 2 rashers each probably. The children won't eat bacon, they'll want their eggs. Mrs. Payne doesn't eat upstairs. 4 rashers. But cut from a joint yourself, because there's nobody else to do it. The knife, the large one, heavy-handled, the one you've watched Mrs. Payne use for everything that requires serious intention. You've never cut bacon from a joint. You've sliced cold meat and bread, but this is different. Thick cured pork, and you need even slices or they won't cook the same. The first slice is too thick. The second is too thin. The third and fourth are approximately right. You don't throw the first 2 away. You put them on a separate plate. Those will be for you and Mrs. Payne this morning. Nobody will know. You're hungry enough to have made your peace with this. The iron skillet, heavier than you're used to, onto the range. No extra fat needed for bacon with this much fat in it. The bacon goes in. The sound is immediate. A violent, crisp sizzle as fat hits hot iron. The smell rises instantly, and it is everything the human body responds to. There is no civilizational veneer thin enough to prevent the physical response to frying bacon. It is appetite in its most fundamental form, salt and heat and protein. Your stomach says something urgent. You stir the porridge with your other hand. In your head, 1:57, 1:58. The eggs are in the water, the toast. You've forgotten the toast. Cut quickly while one hand is still on the porridge spoon. The knife slightly awkward. The slices not quite even but close enough. The bacon. One edge is starting to darken at the corner. You turn it. The sizzle changes pitch. In your head, 2:23, 2:24, 2:45. You take the eggs out. They feel right in your hand when you press gently on the shell. The slight give that means the inside is still liquid. You're 14 years old. Your hands are shaking slightly. Not from fear, from concentration and effort, and the specific kind of adrenaline that comes from doing something for the first time that genuinely matters. The bacon goes on the plate, the slightly overdone edge, acceptable probably. Bacon, you arrange the tray, porridge in the covered dish, eggs in the egg cups, bacon on the platter under a cloth, yesterday's bread sliced in the basket, butter, marmalade, tea, the locked caddy, the key on top of the dresser behind the blue jug. It takes 3 tries, your hands fumbling with the mechanism, and then it opens. The smell comes out. Dark and floral and complex, the real Darjeeling, the tea that goes upstairs. You've smelled it before when you've handed Mrs. Payne the caddy. You've never used it yourself. You make the tea. Then you carry the tray to the bottom of the service stairs and realise Edith isn't here. Edith is on her half day. Thursday off. You knew this. You forgot it. Which means nobody is coming to collect the tray. Which means you have to carry it upstairs yourself. You pick up the tray. The full weight of the morning's work concentrated in one rectangle of silver plate and crockery. Up the service stairs, slowly, the tray level, your arms burning with the sustained weight of it, your eyes watching the surface of the tea in the pot to judge whether you're tilting. Into the hallway, the front hallway, not the kitchen passage. You're in the upstairs part of the house. To the dining room door. You knock with your elbow. Come. Mr. Alderton's voice. Measured. Precise. You've thought about this room, not obsessively, in the practical way that a person thinks about a place they're responsible for without being in it. The way you know the dimensions of a room from the amount of coal it takes to heat it. The way you can picture a fire from its ash. The dining room is larger than the kitchen. The first thing you register, higher ceiling, different air. Not warmer exactly, it's November and coal fires are imperfect, but less dense. Without the steam and the smoke of the basement, a table, white cloth, 2 places set, a window. You'd guess the window, it faces the street. The morning is grey, typical London November grey, but the light is real daylight, coming through glass that doesn't have coal smoke on the inside. Mr. Alderton is at the table with the newspaper. He looks up when you come in. His expression is the careful neutrality of someone navigating an unexpected situation. Agnes, he says, as a fact. Sir, Mrs. Payne is unwell. I've brought breakfast. He looks at the tray. Something moves across his face that you can't read precisely. Bacon, he says. Yes, sir. I thought with Mrs. Payne not being... I couldn't manage the rolls, sir. There wasn't enough time. But there's bread from yesterday and the porridge is... Set it down, Agnes. You set it down. Your arms stop burning. The relief is immediate and complete. He looks at the food arranged on the tray, at the slightly uneven slices of bacon, at the bread instead of rolls, at the tea in its pot. He looks at you. Then he says, "Thank you." 2 words. In a household whose entire architecture is designed to make your work invisible, to create the impression that food arrives on dining room tables through the operation of some benevolent domestic law of nature rather than through the labour of a 14-year-old girl from Bolton who has been awake since 5. Thank you. You're surprised by how much it affects you. Will there be anything else, sir? Tell Mrs. Payne I hope she's better tomorrow. Yes, sir. You take the empty tray and go back to the hall and down the service stairs and into the kitchen. You stand in the kitchen for a moment. Then you go to the larder, cut the thick first slice of bacon you'd set aside, fold it inside a piece of yesterday's bread, and eat it standing next to the range. It is the best thing you've ever eaten. In the weeks that follow, something shifts. Not dramatically. Nothing announces itself. But something is different. Mrs. Payne begins to show you things. Not everything at once. In the way she teaches everything. A piece at a time, without ceremony, without indicating that this is teaching. She explains things while doing them, or asks you to do something you haven't done before and watches without comment, and you either get it right or you don't, and either way she moves on. She shows you how to make a proper white sauce, how to clarify butter, how to test whether the oven is the right temperature by holding your hand inside the door and counting to a certain number before it becomes intolerable. Because there are no thermometers, there is no dial, there is the heat and your hand and the knowledge accumulated in the hand from years of practice. She shows you how to read fat. This sounds strange. What I mean is, there is a moment when something is frying, when the fat in the pan tells you things. The sound changes when the surface of the meat has sealed. The colour of the fat changes when it's getting too hot. The smell changes when you're approaching the point of no return. Mrs. Payne reads this unconsciously. She's been reading it for 30 years, and the reading has gone below thought. You watch her hands. You try to read what she reads. You can't yet. But you're learning to look at the right things. On a Saturday morning in late November, she shows you the rolls. This is the thing they don't tell you about cooking in 1883. Nobody knows precisely why it works. They know what to do. The sequence of flour and yeast and water and salt and knead and rest and bake. They know the temperatures and the timings, accumulated through generations and carried through the craft from one pair of hands to the next. They don't know about gluten development, the protein structures in flour that link and stretch when worked, that create the elastic network that traps the gas and makes bread rise. They don't know the biochemistry of yeast, that it's alive, that it metabolizes sugars and produces carbon dioxide as a byproduct. That heat above a certain temperature kills it as definitively as any other living thing. They know warm water. They know the dough changes. They know the rest time. It works, and they know it works. And the why is a mystery that science is in the process of solving from the other direction. Mrs. Payne puts flour in a bowl. Bread flour, she says, not the plain. She holds out a pinch of each for you to feel between your fingers. One is finer. The other has a different substance to it. A slight resistance, something fuller in the way it moves. Strong flour, more protein, holds the rise better. She doesn't know why. She knows that it does. The water at the right temperature tested on her inner wrist. The yeast dissolved in it, then left until it foams. Small bubbles, then a proper head of beige foam with a slightly sweet smell. Alive. Now mix. You mix, then knead. Her hands covering yours for the first few minutes to establish the motion. Push forward with the heel of the palm, fold back with the fingers, turn a quarter turn, repeat. A rhythm. The dough fights you at first. It tears under your hands, sticks. Gentle, she says. You're working with it. You try again. Softer, more patient. Less force and more attention. And something shifts. Under. Your hands, the texture changes. From rough to smooth, from resistant to responsive. The surface begins to develop a quality you can't name exactly. A readiness. The dough isn't fighting you anymore. There, says Mrs. Payne. Feel that? You do. You can't explain what you feel, but you feel it. Rest it 40 minutes. Come back when it's doubled. 40 minutes later, the dough has doubled. It sits in the bowl, rounded and slightly alive-looking, trembling faintly when you touch the edge of the bowl. You poke it gently with one finger. It springs back. Mrs. Payne appears in the kitchen doorway, looks at the bowl, looks at you. Divide it now. 12 pieces. You divide it. Roll each piece into a ball under your palm on the board, the circular motion coming naturally after watching her do it, the ball forming under your hands as though it wanted to be a ball. Into the tin. Cloth over the top. Wait. At 12 minutes in the oven, you open the door. The smell is something you will remember for a long time. Golden. Slightly cracked at the crown where the crust split as the bread expanded. You tap the bottom of one. A hollow sound. Good, says Mrs. Payne. From Mrs. Payne, this is approximately equivalent to anyone else shouting from the rooftops. December arrives. The cold stops being uncomfortable and becomes serious. The basin of water in your room freezes most nights now. The flagstone floor of the kitchen at 5 in the morning is cold, in a way that goes past your feet, up your legs, and settles somewhere in the middle of your chest as a kind of preemptive exhaustion. The coal deliveries come twice a week instead of once. You know this because you carry most of the coal up from the street delivery, from the iron coal hole in the pavement outside to the bin in the basement. 4 steps, 12 feet, 12 pounds per scuttle, 40 times before the bin is full. Your back knows. But the kitchen is warm by 6. Warmer than the kitchen in Bolton most mornings. Warmer than the cotton mill floor, which in winter is heated only by the machines and the bodies of the workers pressing close to them for warmth. There are things about this life that are harder than you expected. There are things that are better than you feared. The range is warm by 6. That is one thing. You can make rolls now. That is another. Mr. Alderton said, "Thank you." A third. The list is not long, but it is getting longer. Christmas Day, 1883. The household wakes later. Even the servants are allowed to sleep until 6:30. This is a luxury so complete that you lie awake at 6:25 in the dark, too alert from habit to sleep, but unwilling to get up until you are required to. The discipline of 7 months of 5 o'clock alarms has been thorough. Your body doesn't know how to use the extra 90 minutes. 6:30. You get up. The range comes to life under your hands with the practiced ease of a relationship that has, through sheer repetition, become a kind of understanding. You know this machine. You know where it runs hot and where it runs cool, and how long it takes on a still day versus a windy one, and what sound it makes when it's not drawing properly through the flue. The machine, for its part, seems to require less persuading than it used to. Or maybe you've simply learned to ask it correctly. Christmas breakfast is different. The planning has been ongoing for 2 weeks. Mrs. Alderton's consultations with Mrs. Payne in the small office next to the kitchen have been longer than usual. You've overheard fragments. The kidneys, do you think? And something warm for the children, and he does like a proper spread. What goes upstairs on Christmas morning? Porridge. Always porridge, even Christmas. Devilled kidneys. Lamb kidneys cooked with Worcestershire sauce and cayenne pepper and butter. The dish that smells extraordinary from 2 rooms away. The preparation of the kidneys involves removing a thin membrane from each one. This is your job, assigned on Christmas Eve. 12 kidneys, thin membrane, small knife, patience. A Christmas gift to the Aldertons, delivered anonymously through the medium of your careful hands. Kedgeree, rice and smoked haddock and egg and curry powder, a dish that arrived in English kitchens through the Bengal trade, through the network of empire that runs through every part of this country's life. Whether you notice it or not, The spice trade routes that begin in places whose names you've heard and whose existence you can barely picture, that end up here in a kitchen in Bloomsbury, in a dish served for breakfast on Christmas morning in 1883. The smoked haddock has to be poached, the flesh separated from the bones, combined with the rice, with the egg you've boiled and chopped, with the curry powder that stains the back of the spoon yellow. Fresh rolls, you make them, they are good. Mrs. Payne, tasting one, says nothing. You take this as an honour. What do you eat for Christmas breakfast, Mrs. Payne has, without announcing it, outdone herself for the below-stairs table. There's a proper rasher of bacon not dripping, fried eggs and the bacon fat, the whites crisped at the edges the way they go when there's enough fat in the pan, the yolks deep yellow. 3 extra rolls which appeared quietly and nobody commented on. You eat a fried egg on a roll with tea from the locked caddy, which Mrs. Payne has made without asking permission from anyone. It is a small luxury. In this context, in this kitchen, on this morning, it is Christmas. Christmas in London in 1883 is a study in visible extremes. The Alderton household has been preparing for 2 weeks. The Christmas pudding was made on Stir-Up Sunday, the last Sunday before Advent, because Christmas pudding requires weeks of maturing, the dried fruit and sweetened treacle and the small measure of brandy slowly transforming each other into something that couldn't have been predicted from the separate ingredients. This is how Mrs. Payne explained it when she made you watch the mixing. Chemistry, she said, though she didn't use that word. What she said was, it needs time to become itself. The ingredients for the Alderton Christmas pudding: beef suet, the hard fat from around the kidneys of a beef carcass finely grated, breadcrumbs, brown sugar, raisins, currants, sultanas, dried fruit that arrived in London from the Mediterranean on ships, repackaged and sold at the grocers, mixed peel, blanched almonds, nutmeg, ground from whole, always whole, because ground nutmeg has been sitting somewhere losing its fragrance since God knows when, cinnamon, allspice, eggs, stout, brandy. The cost of these ingredients, tallied carefully in Mrs. Alderton's housekeeping book, 3 shillings and 4pence. 3 shillings and 4pence is what Agnes earns in approximately 2.5 weeks. The pudding will serve 8 people once, with enough left for a smaller serving the following day. This is not extravagance by the standards of the Alderton household. This is Christmas. Across London, in Whitechapel and Stepney and Bethnal Green, Christmas is being managed differently. The charitable organisations are active. The Salvation Army, founded 13 years ago by William Booth, who will one day be Charles Booth's distant relation in the business of documenting London's poor, runs Christmas dinners for the destitute, a hot meal, genuine hot food, served in halls and shelters and on streets. The papers cover these events with a warm glow, season of charity, generosity of spirit, our Christian duty to the deserving poor. What the papers don't always calculate is this: the dinner is one meal, on one day. On the 26th, everything goes back to what it was. The cold is the same cold, the bread is the same bread. Philanthropy is not a system. It is a feeling, directed at specific moments. The butcher on the high street in working-class neighbourhoods does something traditional on Christmas Eve. He sells off the remaining meat at reduced prices as the day gets late, because meat that doesn't sell before Christmas doesn't keep through Christmas, and half price is better than no price. Lines form outside these shops from midday. Women with their purses calculating. A small piece of mutton or beef, not the joint the Aldertons will eat, not anything close to it, but meat. Real meat. the thing that dripping is a substitute for. For this one meal, the substitute isn't necessary. For this one meal, there is the real thing. Children in working-class London in 1883 know what Christmas dinner means in a way that children in middle-class households don't quite know, because for them it is different from other days in kind rather than just in degree. It is not simply a better version of the ordinary meal. It is a different category of meal entirely. That distinction, having it only once, makes it sharper, more real, more absolutely worth remembering. There is a man named William Cobbett who died 50 years before our November morning, died in 1835, who spent his life writing about English food and English poverty and the relationship between them. He wrote, "I defy you to agitate a fellow with a full stomach." What he meant was, hunger is political. A fed population is a population with the energy to think beyond survival. A hungry population is a population managing immediate needs, which leaves no cognitive surplus for questioning the systems that create the hunger. Whether this was Cobbett's intention as a critique or as an observation is a matter of interpretation. He was, at various points in his life, on various sides of various arguments. But the observation stands. The people reforming English society in the 1880s, the early trade unionists, the settlement house workers, the women's organisations, the early Fabians, who will eventually help create the Labour Party, understand this connection. They understand that organising requires people who are not spending all their available energy on the basic biological project of getting through the day. They start, many of them, with food, not as charity, as strategy, as the necessary precondition for everything else they want to do. Fed people think. Fed people attend meetings. Fed people can imagine a future that isn't just tomorrow being like today. This is why the breakfast question matters. This is why the school meals question matters. It is not only about nutrition. It is about what a person can do when nutrition is not the primary problem. Agnes, eating her Christmas fried egg on a fresh roll at the kitchen table at 14 Montague Street, is not thinking about any of this. She is thinking about whether she got the timing on the kedgeree exactly right, and whether Mrs. Payne will notice that she didn't. But she is thinking. Her stomach is not the loudest thing in her head. That is not a small thing. January, February, the cold has settled into the bones of the city, the kind of winter that doesn't relent but simply continues. Grey day after grey day, the sky the colour of stone. You have been at 14 Montague Street for 10 months now. 10 months ago, you got lost twice on your first errand. You couldn't light the range reliably. You held the kitchen implements like someone who'd been recently introduced to them. Now you know which coal burns longest and which burns fast, and how the flue needs to be managed when the wind comes from the northeast. You know that Mrs. Payne's dyspepsia comes back when she'd been standing on stone floors for more than 3 hours, and that on those afternoons you should make sure the kitchen stool is within reach without her having to ask. You know Mr. Alderton by his breakfast requirements and his schedule, and the slight tightening around his eyes that means he's running late, and requires nobody to confirm this by speaking to him. You know the city, not all of it, not most of it, but your piece of it. The streets between Montague Street and the market and the butcher and the coal merchant and the broken gate on the south side of Russell Square that everyone knows about. It is starting to feel, in some complicated way, like yours. In February, your mother writes. She writes every month on the Sunday closest to the 15th, in her steady schoolroom hand, She had 2 years of schooling, your mother, which was 1 year more than most women her age in Bolton, and she taught herself better than she started. The letters are practical. Who is working? Whether your father's chest is better, whether Robert has grown out of his coat again. This letter has something extra at the bottom, added in slightly darker ink. The pen redipped. Your Aunt Martha says you should think about the millinery trade when your time is done. There is a shop in Bolton doing well. I only say what she says. You know what you want better than I do. You read this 3 times. Millinery. Hats. You think about it on the walk from the tradesman's entrance to the market, your basket on your arm, February rain making the cobblestones shine. You know what your hands know now. You can feel it, the specific knowledge that lives in the hands after 10 months of doing particular things in a particular order. The weight of a pot of water, the way dough changes under pressure, the angle at which you hold the egg to lower it into simmering water without cracking it. You have opinions about coal, about flu management, about bread flour. These are not millinery opinions. On the way back, you pass a coffee house, a working man's kind, a penny a cup place with steamed windows and men at narrow tables. Through the glass, people eating breakfast, eggs, toast, a pot of tea. Tradesmen, probably. Men who work with their hands or their pens. People who eat well enough in the morning to think clearly for the rest of the day. You watch them for a moment. Then you go back to 14 Montague, street and make lunch. The millinery answer comes to you sometime in April. You can't pin down the exact moment whether you're stirring something or carrying something, and the answer is no, not millinery, something else. Something that uses what you know. What you know is how to make a kitchen work. March. The grey starts to lift, not dramatically. This is London. Spring here is not theatrical. But there are mornings now when the light through the scullery window comes in at an angle that is subtly warmer. The coal consumption goes down slightly. The cooking changes. Mrs. Payne starts using lighter preparations, less long stewed, more quick made, a shift in the whole kitchen's metabolism that follows the season the way breathing follows the body. And one morning in late March you open the door to the small outside area, the square of courtyard between the house and the area steps, and the air is different. Not warm, not by any reasonable standard warm, but less cold than it has been since October, and there is, from somewhere over the wall, the smell of something green, not identifiable as a specific plant, just green, vegetation waking up, the specific smell of living things beginning to do their living again after a winter of suspension. Bolton would smell like this in March. Different green. The fields outside the town, the canal bank on Sunday afternoons, but the same impulse in the air. You stand in the area with your hands in your apron pockets and breathe in. Agnes, Mrs. Payne's voice from the kitchen, coming. Here is what you know about yourself by the spring of 1884. You're 15 now. You have been at 14 Montague Street for 1 year. You can light the range in 11 minutes from cold. Mrs. Payne can do it in 8. She has 30 years on you. You can make porridge and soft-boiled eggs and fried bacon and devilled kidneys and kedgeree and poached kippers and rolls, all of them reliably, all of them to the standard the household requires. You understand the economics of below-stairs food, the hierarchy, what's for upstairs, what's for downstairs, what goes no further than the kitchen table, the small calculations that govern the larder. You've started asking Mrs. Payne questions, not the polite, diffident questions of the first weeks, actual questions. Why does bread flour hold the rise better? Why does porridge need to be stirred one direction? Why does the oven run hotter on the right side? She answers them, sometimes briefly, sometimes in more detail than you expected, sometimes with a look that means she doesn't know either but won't say so. You've started keeping notes. In a small notebook from the stationers on Museum Street, 2 pence. You write timings and temperatures described as when the water shimmers before boiling and the sequence for getting a flue to draw in a north wind. Mrs. Payne has noticed the notebook. She hasn't commented on it. You think this means she doesn't disapprove. You think about the future the way you thought about London when you were in Bolton, as something real but not yet resolved, a place you can gesture toward without seeing clearly. But the shape is forming. A cook, a real cook, not a scullery maid, not a kitchen maid, a cook. The woman who runs the kitchen, who makes the decisions, who teaches the girl who comes in from the country not knowing anything, the way you came in not knowing anything. That woman has to start somewhere. You started here. The night is late. You've been awake since 5 in the morning and it's now 11. Later than you should be awake, later than tomorrow's 5 o'clock makes sensible. But you're not quite ready to sleep. You're sitting at the kitchen table with your notebook, the lamp turned low, the range banked for the night, the sounds of the house settling around you. In the attic room above this kitchen, there is a new girl. She arrived last month from Derbyshire. 15 years old, has never been to London, is afraid of the range and of Mrs. Payne in approximately equal measure. Her name is Clara. She comes to breakfast with the slightly dazed look of someone who hasn't yet found their footing on this particular ground. You know that look. You showed her how to light the range on her 3rd morning, explained the dampers, stayed long enough to make sure the kindling caught. "How long does it take?" she asked. "To learn the range?" "A few weeks. To learn the kitchen?" You thought about it. "A few months. And to not be afraid?" "That's different for everyone. But it does happen. You stop being afraid." She nodded like she didn't believe you. You remember not believing it either. The girl from Derbyshire asks you a question on her 2nd Thursday. She asks it while you're both in the scullery, up to your wrists in the morning's washing up, the water going from hot to warm to tepid as the work progresses. Does she ever? Clara pauses, reformulating. Does Mrs. Payne ever say it's good? You think about this. She said one of my rolls was acceptable in December. That's good. From Mrs. Payne, acceptable is a standing ovation. Clara absorbs this. How do you know when you're doing it right then? This is a better question than she knows it is. You rinse a bowl and set it in the rack. Think. The range tells you, you say eventually. The food tells you. If the porridge is lumpy, you know. If the bread doesn't rise, you know. It's not about whether someone says it's right. The thing itself tells you. She looks at you as though this might be philosophy of some kind, which she's not sure she needed at 7:15 in the morning. But what if you can't tell, she asks. What if you think it's right and it's not? That happens. It happens for a long time. And then one day, it stops happening as often. When does it stop? You pull your hands out of the water. They're red-pink from the heat, wrinkled at the fingertips. When you've done it enough times that your hands know before you do. She looks at her own hands, young hands. No calluses yet. No burn marks, no story written in the skin. How many times is enough? You pick up the drying cloth, more than you want. There is something nobody tells you about learning a craft. The moment of competence doesn't arrive like a doorway you step through, announced and clear. It accumulates without announcing itself. You do a thing badly for weeks, and then slightly less badly, and then one morning you do it and it's simply right. The roll is golden. The egg is exactly set. The oven temperature was exactly what it needed to be. And you have no memory of crossing any threshold. You just know. Or more accurately, your hands know, and your hands tell your brain. And by the time your brain gets the message, it's already been true for some weeks. Mrs. Payne has a way of standing in the kitchen when you're working that changed sometime around October. In the early months she stood close, not watching, exactly. She was always doing something herself, but physically proximate in a way that meant she was monitoring, that she was in range of the intervention that might be required. By October, she had drifted back. She worked at the other end of the kitchen. She kept her attention on her own tasks. This is the visible evidence of trust in a professional kitchen. Not a speech, not a promotion, not any form of explicit acknowledgement. Simply, she moved to the other end of the room. You noticed. You didn't say anything, but you understood. Clara will learn this too, if she stays. If the city doesn't frighten her off in the first winter, which is the winter that loses the most girls, the ones who came thinking London would be interesting, and discovered instead that it is cold and unrelenting and deeply indifferent to whether you specifically are managing. Some go home. There's no shame in it. The shame is the other direction. The pressure from family who paid for the train ticket, who told everyone the daughter was going into service in London, for whom your return is a complication of expectations. But some go home anyway, and some stay, and learn the range, and learn the bread, and learn the specific angle of Mrs. Payne's silence that means everything is fine, and the different specific angle of Mrs. Payne's silence that means something is about to need addressing. And some of them become something, not famous, not wealthy, not the subject of any history you'd find in a library, but skilled, genuinely, professionally, rigorously skilled, in possession of knowledge that lives in their hands as much as in their heads, able to walk into any kitchen in any house in any English city, and within 20 minutes have a reliable read on the range and the larder, and what will be expected and how to meet it. That is a life. That is a real thing. That could be you, Clara, if you stop being afraid of the range. The lamp is warm on your hands. The kitchen at night is different from the kitchen in the morning. In the morning, the kitchen is emergency and noise and heat and smell, every element in motion, the whole system running at full pressure toward a deadline that doesn't move. At night, it rests. The copper pots hang on the wall, still in the low light, as still as they ever get. The range ticks quietly as the metal cools from work in temperature. That same ticking you first heard on your first morning, that sound of thermal expansion, now as familiar as a heartbeat, maybe more familiar than some heartbeats. The flagstone floor, which at 5 a.m. is brutal under bare feet, now holds the day's warmth in it, residual heat from hours of fire. You could walk on it without flinching. The smell of the kitchen at night is its own thing, coal and soap and the ghost of everything cooked today, the soup at luncheon, the mutton at supper, this morning's roll still faintly present somewhere in the fabric of the room, food and fire and work. That is what this room smells like. That is what you smell like. You've stopped noticing it. You think about the Aldertons, not with resentment exactly. Resentment requires sustained attention, and you don't have the energy for sustained anything by 9 p.m, but with observation, the way you observe the weather or the coal supply. as a fact of the landscape. The Aldertons are not cruel people. This is worth saying clearly because it would be easy to construct the story differently, to make the family upstairs into villains, exploiters, people who understand exactly what they're doing and are doing it deliberately. They are not. Mr. Alderton is a solicitor who works long hours and reads the newspaper at breakfast and has opinions about the quality of the marmalade. He knows your name. He used it the morning you brought his Christmas breakfast, and he said thank you, which was not nothing. Mrs. Alderton runs this household with genuine competence. She consults. Mrs. Payne, she maintains the accounts. She's not extravagant. She's not cruel to the children. She gave you 2 days off in September when your mother wrote that your father was ill, which was outside her obligation. The children are children. Master Frederick has started to learn which days the cook makes rolls, and times his post-lesson appearances in the kitchen passage accordingly. Miss Millicent brought you a sprig of something from the garden in July, and left it on the kitchen table without explanation, and disappeared before you could respond. These are not villains. They are people living inside a system they didn't design, taking its terms for granted the way you take the weight of the coal scuttle for granted. Not because you decided the weight was acceptable, but because the weight is simply what the thing is, and you carry it. The system says there is a kitchen in the basement, and there are people who work in it, and there is a dining room upstairs, and there are people who eat in it, and these are different categories of people, and the difference between the categories is written into the physical structure of the house, into the separate stairs and the separate entrance, and the separate food and the separate everything. Nobody in this house invented this. They were born into it the way you were born into the Bolton cotton economy, not as a choice, not as a statement about the natural order of things, but as the water you swim in, the air you breathe, the thing that goes without saying, precisely because saying it would require stopping to examine it, and stopping to examine things is a luxury of people with time to spare. You are beginning to understand this. Not because anyone has explained it to you, because you watch, because you carry things upstairs and downstairs, and notice the difference in the air between 2 floors of the same building, because you eat bread and dripping 3 feet from 3 untouched rolls, and the geometry of that fact keeps suggesting itself to your attention, and eventually the thing geometry keeps suggesting becomes an idea. The idea is not, the Aldertons are bad people, and I am oppressed. The idea is simpler and stranger and harder to put down once you've picked it up. The arrangement is not inevitable. That's all. Not, it's wrong, necessarily. Not, it should be different, or here is how it should be different. Just, it is an arrangement. It was made by people. It can be examined. It can be compared to other arrangements. That is a very small idea. It is also the beginning of every large idea that has ever changed anything. You don't think in these terms. Not yet. You're 15, and you're tired, and your hands hurt. But somewhere in the back of your mind, below the tiredness, the idea is sitting. Arrangements can be examined. Things that go without saying can occasionally be said. The kitchen is in the basement because someone decided kitchens go in basements and someone else agreed, and the third person built the house accordingly, and now it feels like gravity, like a law of nature, like the only way things could possibly be. But it isn't. Quite. It isn't. You close the notebook, tuck it into your apron pocket, the reflex now keeping things close, knowing where things are. You look at the window above the scullery sink, dark outside, the area steps, the iron railings, the pavement above. No one passing at this hour. The gas lamp at the corner, the lamplighter came at dusk, throws a pale yellow shadow down into the area. From here you can see the bottom of the lamppost, the edge of the pavement, one worn paving stone. That is your view of London from the kitchen window. It used to feel like being trapped inside a house to look at it. Now it just feels like where you are. Outside, London goes on. The night soil men are working the streets, their carts moving through the dark, their long-handled implements doing work that can only happen at night. The work the city requires, but requires not to be seen. By morning, the evidence will be gone and the daytime city can maintain its preferred understanding of its own operations. Somewhere, a bakery's been awake since midnight. Commercial bakers start early. They work through your sleeping hours in ovens hotter than Mrs. Payne's, producing the bread that will be at the market before dawn, that will be in the shops by 6, that will be in the bread basket on the kitchen table by 7:30. The milk round is beginning somewhere in the dark. The cold carts moving through empty streets. The morning supply beginning its journey to morning doorsteps. The city is preparing its own breakfast in the dark while everyone sleeps. All the invisible labour, all the before-dawn work, all the making ready that precedes the morning. It runs all night, every night. And somewhere in the working-class streets, not far from here, less far than you'd think, a woman is awake before dawn for different reasons. Not a cook, not a servant, a mother. She has 3 children and a husband who works the early shift starting at 6, which means she's been up since 4:30 to get him fed and out the door. Her range is smaller than this one. The coal is cheaper and there's less of it. The bread is from the baker at the corner, the cheap baker, where the bread is grey and dense from the things added to make cheap flour look like good flour. She cuts 2 slices, smears them with margarine, not butter, margarine, which has been on the market since 1869, cheap butter made from animal fat, which the dairy industry has been lobbying against since it appeared, but which is all her family can afford. The children will have the same. Whether they learn anything on it, whether bread and margarine provides what a child needs to attend and remember and grow, is not a question that anyone with the power to answer it is asking. Not yet. Not in 1884, but soon. You blow out the lamp. The kitchen goes dark except for the faint orange trace at the range vents. The banked fire still alive inside, contained, waiting. You go upstairs in the dark. You know the service stairs by heart now. 11 steps. The 3rd from the bottom, outside edge. The 7th step, softly, up to the attic. Clara is already asleep, her breathing slow and even. The deep sleep of a 15-year-old who got up before dawn and worked until 9 at night, and whose body has decided on its own authority that consciousness is no longer required. You sit on the edge of the mattress, take off your boots, set them under the chair, untie your apron and fold it. Lie down. The straw mattress, which you stopped finding uncomfortable sometime around July, receives you, your hands, in your lap until a moment ago. Now at your sides in the dark, red at the knuckles, the small cut on your right index finger from the knife this morning, closed to a dark line. The faint scar across the heel of your left palm, where the pan caught you 3 weeks after you arrived, pale now, part of the hand's permanent record. The skin over the back of both hands slightly rough from the constant cycling between cold water and hot water. The kind of hands that show their work, that carry their history visibly. The hands of someone who is making something. You did not expect to like this work. You like this work. Not the part that is getting up before dawn in the cold. Not the part that is carrying coal or scrubbing the grate or eating bread and dripping while the smell of someone else's bacon is in your hair. But the part that is knowing things. The part that is learning more of them. The part that is making something. Rolls, porridge, a properly managed range, a breakfast that appears on a dining room table at 8:15, and knowing that it is good because you made it good, not because it happened accidentally. Tomorrow you'll do it again. 5 o'clock. The dark, the cold, the range, the porridge, and it will be slightly different from today, because no morning is exactly the same morning, even when it looks identical. The coal burns differently depending on the wind. The water takes longer or shorter depending on where the range started. The dough feels different in your hands from one week to the next. The sequence is the same sequence. The attention is always new. The sounds of the house settle somewhere above you. The structural sounds of a building accommodate in temperature change. The small creaks and shifts of a house that's been standing since 1850 and intends to stand for another century. Somewhere in the city, a cart, a dog, a church bell, faint and distant, strike in an hour you're too tired to count. The range ticks 3 floors below you, cooling, resting, waiting for 5 o'clock. You close your eyes. Centuries will pass. The house at 14 Montague Street will outlast the Aldertons, will outlast Mrs. Payne, will be sold and divided and converted. The kitchen will be renovated. The range removed, replaced with something modern, then something more modern still. There will be taps with hot water, an oven with a temperature dial, lighting that doesn't flicker, no coal to carry. No girl will need to get on her knees in front of cold iron at 5 in the morning and coax fire from damp kindling with the specific stubbornness that you develop when the alternative is being dismissed without a reference. The food will be different, the labour will be different, but people will still make breakfast. They will still stand in kitchens in the early morning, still wait for something to heat, still listen for the sound that tells them something is ready. They will still know the difference between the smell of bread dough resting and bread ready to bake. They will still feel in their hands the moment when something is right. They will still, at the end of a long day, need to eat, need to rest, need the same things you need tonight in this cold attic room, above a kitchen in Bloomsbury. Some things don't change. The human body's requirements don't change. The need, at the end of the long day, for something to be enough. You are warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. You have a roof over your head and work that matters, and people who are counting on you to show up tomorrow and do it all again. You have hands that know things they didn't know a year ago. You have a notebook with timings and temperatures, and the specific method for getting a range to draw in a north wind. You have, somewhere below thought, the beginning of a life that belongs to you. That's more than a lot of people have. That's enough. Let it come. Let sleep take you the way it took Agnes Hartley in her attic room on Montague Street, Bloomsbury, London, 140 years ago. Let the sounds of the city soften. Let the cold in the room stop registering. Let your hands stop recording what they've carried today. Let your mind, which has been working since before, it wanted to be working since before 5 this morning, since before you were fully aware of yourself, find the stillness it has earned. You've lit the fire. You've made the food. You've done the work. Tomorrow is tomorrow. Tonight is only this. The dark of the room. The steady breathing of the girl beside you. The tick of the range 3 floors below, cooling into night. the distant heartbeat of a city that never quite stops. Let it go. Let the sounds blur into each other until they become something ambient, something that isn't words or thoughts, but simply the texture of the world going on around you while you leave it for a while. Let your body remember that it knows how to do this, has always known, knows it the way it knows breathing, below thought, below intention. Rest is not an interruption. Rest is the other half of the work. The range banks, the fire waits, the city breathes. You close your eyes and it all becomes soft and then quiet and then nothing but rest. Let the kitchen rest. 3 floors below you right now, the range is doing what it does at night, cooling by degrees, the temperature falling by a measurable amount every hour, the cast iron losing what the coal gave it at a rate that is consistent and predictable, and has been consistent and predictable since the day the thing was installed. By morning it will be cold. By 6 o'clock you will have made it warm again. This is the cycle. This is what the days are made of, not the dramatic events, not the Christmas morning with the kedgeree, not the morning Mrs. Payne was ill, not the morning Mr. Alderton said thank you in the dining room, which is something you will remember for a long time, though you couldn't say exactly why. The days are made of the cycle. Light the range, heat the water, make the food, carry the food, wash the things the food was made in, wash the things the food was served on, prepare for tomorrow, sleep again and again. And within that cycle, within the repetition, that is not repetition because no morning is quite the same morning. Something is being built. You are being built. The knowledge going into your hands one morning at a time. The confidence, very slow, barely visible, assembling itself from all the mornings the thing went right. From all the mornings you didn't need Mrs. Payne to step in. From all the customers fed and all the household running as it should, and all the evidence accumulated in small increments over months, that you are someone who can be trusted to make this work. That is not nothing. In a world that arranges itself very carefully to tell certain people that they are not very much, that they are the background, the infrastructure, the invisible mechanism behind the visible result, the accumulation of actual competence is something real. Your hands know things. Nobody can take that back. Tomorrow the church bells will pull you out of sleep at 5. The cold will be there waiting, the range will be cold, iron and ash, and the faint ghost of yesterday's fire waiting to become tomorrow's fire. You will get on your knees on the flagstone floor and coax it awake the way you've done every morning for a year, and it will start. And you will go through the day the way you go through every day, tending, feeding, washing, carrying, doing the 1,000 small precise things that make a household function without appearing to function. And the household will have its breakfast, and nobody upstairs will think much about how that happened. And you will know, somewhere in the city tonight, a girl younger than you is deciding whether to take a position in service. She's sitting in a room in Manchester or Leeds or Derby or somewhere smaller, and the position is in London, and London seems terrifying from where she's sitting, and she doesn't know anyone there, and everything about it is uncertain. She is weighing the certain poverty of staying against the uncertain possibility of going. She is going to take it. She's going to step off a train at Euston or King's Cross into the noise and the smell and the impossible size of it, and she's going to find her way to a basement kitchen somewhere in this city, and she's going to kneel on cold flagstones and stare at a range she doesn't know yet, and it is going to be very hard. And she's going to learn it, and her hands are going to know things that they don't know yet, and the cycle will continue, as it has continued before her, as it will continue after. This is how it moves forward, not in proclamations or monuments or the kind of history that gets written down and remembered, in kitchens, in hands, in the transmission of knowledge from one pair of hands to the next in the dark, before anyone else is awake, in the hours before the photographs are taken. The range ticks. The city breathes. Clara breathes beside you, slow and steady. Already gone. You are warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. Tomorrow will come, and it will ask what today asked, and you will answer the way you answered today. That is enough. That is everything. Let the sounds go. Let the cold in the walls keep its distance for a few hours. Let your hands lie still, those hands that have worked since 5 this morning and will work again at 5 tomorrow. Those hands that are the instruments of everything you know. Those hands that are becoming, slowly and without ceremony, something real. Let them rest. They have earned it. You have earned it. Let sleep take you the way it takes everyone who works this hard and this honestly and this invisibly, all the way down, into the quiet, into the dark, into the long-earned rest of someone who lit the fire this morning and will light it again tomorrow and knows, somewhere below thought, that this is worth doing, that this is real, that these small, precise, difficult things matter even when nobody is watching, especially when nobody is watching. Good night, Agnes.